And those are some of the headlines. This is Breaking with Convention, War, Peace, and the Presidency. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting from PhillyCam, the Philadelphia's public access TV station. The Democratic National Convention's entered its final day. Tonight, Hillary Clinton will make history when she becomes the first woman to accept a major party presidential nomination. On Wednesday, Vice President Joe Biden warned about the dangers of a Donald Trump presidency.
No major party nominee in the history of this nation has ever known less or has been less prepared to deal with our national security. We cannot elect a man who exploits our fears of ISIS and other terrorists, who has no plan whatsoever to make us safer. A man who embraces the tactics of our enemies, torture, religious intolerance. You all know. All the Republicans know. That's not who we are. It betrays our values.
President Obama also spoke, urging the country to reject Donald Trump's cynicism and fear.
He's betting that if he scares enough people, he might score just enough votes to win this election. And that's another bet that Donald Trump will lose. And the reason he'll lose it is because he's selling the American people short. We're not a fragile people. We're not a frightful people. Our power doesn't come from some self-declared savior promising that he alone can restore order as long as we do things his way. We don't look to be ruled. Our power comes from those immortal declarations first put to paper right here in Philadelphia all those years ago. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that we, the people, can form a more perfect union. That's who we are. That's our birthright, the capacity to shape our own destiny. That's what drove patriots to choose revolution over tyranny, and our GIs to liberate a continent. It's what gave women the courage to reach for the ballot, and marchers to cross a bridge in Selma, and workers to organize and fight for collective bargaining and better wages. America's never been about what one person says he'll do for us. It's about what can be achieved by us, together, through the hard and slow and sometimes frustrating, but ultimately enduring work of self-government.
That was President Obama addressing the Democratic National Convention last night. As we turn now to Maryland, where the Baltimore State's Attorney, Marilyn Mosby, has announced she will drop all charges against the remaining 3 police officers charged in the death of Freddie Gray. Gray died in April of 2015 of spinal injuries after he was arrested and transported in a police van. 4 officers in the case went on trial earlier this year. None were convicted on any of the charges they faced, which included murder. Mosby announced the dropping of the charges on Wednesday.
As the world has witnessed over the past 14 months, the prosecution of on-duty police officers in this country is unsurprisingly rare and blatantly fraught with systemic and inherent complications.
Yes, it is.
Unlike with other cases where prosecutors work closely with the police to investigate what actually occurred, what we realized very early on in this case was that police investigating police, whether they're friends or merely their colleagues, was problematic.
That's right. That's right.
There was a reluctance and an obvious bias that was consistently exemplified not by the entire Baltimore Police Department, but by individuals within the Baltimore Police Department at every stage of the investigation, which became blatantly apparent in the subsequent trials.
Joining us now is Stephanie Rawlings-Blake, the mayor of Baltimore and the secretary of the Democratic National Convention. She replaced Debbie Wasserman Schultz in opening the Democratic Convention. We welcome you to Democracy Now! We're going to talk about the convention in a minute, but first to this breaking news of all of the charges being dropped against the remaining officers, which mean that none of them will be held accountable for the death of Freddie Gray. Your response?
I think it's interesting that that's how the question is phrased, that no one is being held accountable. We have a justice system that requires guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That's if you're a police officer, a doctor, a person who's living with substance abuse or disabilities. Everyone has that same entitlement to be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That is how we find people responsible in the court system. And repeatedly, the judge determined that the state's attorney did not have the evidence to get anywhere near guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the process of justice, period.
I guess many would say, did Freddie Gray have that choice?
I don't understand what you're saying.
Meaning he died. He died in police custody before.
And that's why, after taking a look at the facts of the case, taking a look at the information, I reached very promptly, and even taking criticism for it, I reached a settlement with his family because he did die in police custody, and I wanted to bring closure. There are no guarantees. A verdict is never a guarantee in any case. But I knew that for the sake of the family to have closure and for them to be able to move forward in the healing process, that's why we settled the case. What
is your message to the community around police accountability in Freddie Gray's death?
The message is that the work to hold the police accountable, to have more transparency, and to have a better police department was happening before the tragic death of Freddie Gray, and has been happening subsequently. I think that it is a mistake for anyone, for a prosecutor, for a mayor, for a member of the public, to hang their hopes that reform happens or accountability happens because of a verdict. That never is the case. What happens is the hard work of reform that has been happening under my administration. The Department of Justice collaborative review, I asked the Department of Justice to come in and work with us on bridging the gap between the community and the police before the tragic and untimely death of Freddie Gray. I asked the state legislature to take a look at the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights and reform that before the tragic death of Freddie Gray. And many of the people that you saw in that clip, not a one was there. Fighting with me, testifying with me, trying to get that done. The Legislative Black Caucus wouldn't even hold a vote to see whether they should support the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights reform that I put forth. Now, after the unfortunate and untimely tragic death of Freddie Gray, everybody wants to be on board with these reforms. That's not, to live in a reactionary world sets up all types of discord and disappointment in the community. You have to be proactive and continue to work on a consistent basis, and that's what I've done. You also called
for the Justice Department to open a pattern and practice investigation.
And I have been and the Department of Justice says I've been the most aggressive mayor they've ever experienced when it comes to fighting for reforms and transparency in the police department.
Has the Justice Department?
Yeah, they're there now. Yeah, the investigation is almost complete.
I want to go back to Baltimore City State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby speaking Wednesday. She said there's an inherent bias that's a direct result of when police themselves.
There were individual police officers that were witnesses to the case, yet were part of the investigative team. Interrogations that were conducted without asking the most poignant questions. Lead detectives that were completely uncooperative and started a counter-investigation to disprove the state's case by not executing search warrants pertaining to text messages among the police officers involved in the case, creating videos to disprove the state's case without our knowledge, creating notes that were drafted after the case was launched to contradict the medical examiner's conclusion, turning these notes over to defense attorneys months prior to turning them over to the state, and yet doing it in the middle of trial. As you can see, whether investigating, interrogating, testifying, cooperating, or even complying with the state, we've all bore witness to an inherent bias that is a direct result of when police police themselves.
So that's the state's attorney, Mayor Rawlings-Blake. Your response?
I think it's important to take a look at what the judge said in the case after hearing the evidence, and none of those things were clear from the evidence that was put in front of the case. And if any of those things were the case, that's what you say in a press conference, before the trial, before you bring charges, that you can't bring charges because of this inherent bias, because of these things, and that's not what happened. Unfortunately, during the case, what the judge found is that the prosecution withheld exculpatory evidence, that the prosecution violated rules that required evidence to be withheld from consideration. You can't have it both ways. The rules have to work on both sides. And when that happens, that's when justice happens. I'm an attorney by profession, and I understand the very high moral and ethical and professional standards that we have to have. And I also understand as an elected official what it means to impugn the integrity of the process, what it means to impugn the integrity of the the judge, the investigators. You can't say on one hand in a press conference that you did your own independent investigation, and that's how you came to the conclusion. And then when it doesn't work out, say that it was because it was flawed. Say that up front. Give people the information up front. You
called for the resignation of the former police chief, Anthony Batts, in the wake of Freddie Gray's death. He spoke yesterday and said the state's attorney, Marilyn Mosby, was immature and incompetent. What is your response to that? I don't have a response. He's a private citizen. He's entitled to his opinion. You mentioned the suit that you arrived at, the settlement with the family. Baltimore's agreed to pay Officer Cesar Goodson more than $87,000 after he was found not guilty of second-degree murder and other charges. Reports are the trials cost the city more than $7 million. That doesn't include the $6 million settlement with the Gray family. Can you talk about all the costs of the Freddie Gray case? I mean, you outlined some of them, and there would have been more. Every time there's a trial, every time we have to prepare for a verdict and the potential outcome of that, it costs the city money. And imagine, we know what it costs just for the criminal portion of the trial. If there were then to be a protracted civil case, as there have been in many jurisdictions, the cost would have gone up significantly more. Will you be settling with other of the officers, giving money to them, as you did with Officer Cesar Goodson? I would not and have not given the officers anything that they're not entitled to by law and by contract.